Let's talk about 2002's Spider-Man, directed by the legendary Sam Raimi. Now, I've been wanting to talk about these movies for so long. I've been making YouTube videos forever now, it feels like, and I've always avoided directly and in-depth talking about these movies just because I've been nervous, man. These movies are super important to me. These are like a big part of like my upbringing, as corny as that sounds. And I've never really felt confident enough to put into words why I love these movies so much. It's the same reason why I've held off making a movie about the Mummy and stuff like that, just because there's something about it that is tough to explain, but I'm gonna try to here. So bear with me. This is a ramble that is years in the making. So where it starts for me, probably is where it starts with a lot of people. When the original movie teaser dropped, it was unbelievable. I remember sitting in the movie theater for some other movie, God knows what it was, and the big Spider-Man preview dropped. The one that you may have seen where it's like a bank heist tease with it ending with the robbers getting away in a helicopter, and the helicopter gets stuck in a giant spider web in between the World Trade Center. Obviously, unfortunately, that was, you know, axed from the marketing in a lot of ways. But that was just the most incredible thing to see, especially as a kid. Out of nowhere, I had no idea there was a Spider-Man movie coming, and then I freaking melted into my seat. Also, side note, I have actually like the limited one, the original run of the movie posters that actually had the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers in the reflection of Spider-Man's eye, which they edited out later on. I have that in my collection. One day I'll hang it up when I have room. But anyway, where was I? So thankfully, fast forwarding, it did live up to what that teaser set up. It was so cool, for lack of a better word. It managed to be different and unexpected, but exactly what people were hoping for. And for me, it was like X-Men by Bryan Singer really kind of pitched the ball, and then Spider-Man knocked it out of the park and hit a home run and kicked off the whole crazy superhero thing. Also, shout out to Blade. Don't want to leave him hanging for putting this all in motion. But Spider-Man is really where things get crazy. And I think because this movie is just so passionate and beautiful and weird top to bottom in the way that a comic book movie should be. And it's a little bit different than from today. And I think some people, like newer generations, might look back at it and go, this is weird, this is campy, this is corny, this Peter Parker isn't quite right, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of things that you can say and a lot of things I can, maybe agree with, but it's just so good. Fuck. So right off the bat, I think what it does great for audiences is how it teaches you Spider-Man. It gets you up to speed. It educates you on Spider-Man. You know, it kicks off right at the start with him getting bit by a spider. The way it establishes things like his reflexes and with the spider sense, like basically all of the high school cafeteria scene, that whole thing is really well done for just simply establishing what his deal is, what his powers are, but also doing it in a way that is, on the one hand, practical and exciting with some real stuff, with him swinging on grabbing a rope and going to swing on it, to him catching all of the school lunch on the tray, to then it going over the top with special effects with him doing the spider sense with the fight with Flash, who looks like he's like 30 years old in high school, which is really funny. Honestly, it's a high school full of 25-year-olds. That's just how movies used to be, I guess. I don't know. But how it sets that up, how it really establishes the whole thing with Spider-Man, for me, is flawless. As someone who had already grown up at that point, or not really grown up, I was still a kid, but reading the comic books, watching all the TV shows, being exposed to all these Spider-Man things for so long, seeing it on screen pretty accurately was really fun and exciting, except for little things like the web shooters, which are not in this movie. It shoots out of his wrist, and, first reaction was like, ooh, that's weird. That's very gross and weird. But if you want to talk about like making a movie and kind of streamlining things and focusing it, sure. Here, I guess it works. It makes sense. And honestly, you got used to it pretty quickly. I'll talk more about that whole aspect towards the end, but just the whole thing from the wrestling match with Bonesaw, with not only Bonesaw, but actual Macho Man Randy Savage as Bonesaw, just incredible, like coked up, roided up, like out of his mind, Jack. Like it was so good, to the whole big Uncle Ben thing. And how they did it here, I think is really worth highlighting, because Cliff Robertson had a very small role in this movie. Hey, Michelangelo, I'm on my ass, mate. He was only in a couple of scenes, but like any good Uncle Ben in any good Spider-Man story, I think It's not about time spent, it's about impact. And, you know, his small role in this movie really had a lasting impact that you actually feel and actually makes sense. Although I will say, as Spider-Man, I totally would have fucked over that wrestling promoter guy because of what he says. The ad says $3,000 for 3 minutes, and you pinned him 2. For that, I give you 100. That doesn't even make sense. I would have let that guy rob him too. I guess I'm not cut out to be a superhero, but whatever. But the whole thing I'm saying here with how it's instructing you, or it's setting up audiences to get to know Spider-Man, his abilities, his powers, all that is the first big web swinging sequence where he's chasing the robber. So just the simple act of it establishing that whole Spider-Man flow is just so perfectly done for the average moviegoer. Just the way it shows him swing and go, and he almost hits a building, and then he shoots a web the other way and pulls himself that way. And then that's it. It clicks, you get it. Do the physics make sense? I don't know, but it really sets up how he swings from rope to rope and why he does it. And you're off and running. And that sequence right from the start, with him chasing that car at night and with him kind of just swinging over streetlights, super low down to the street, still looks really damn good to this day. And not all the CGI looks great in this movie. I still am very happy that this movie completely relies on a lot of actual stuff. There is a real Spider-Man in a costume doing stuff in a lot of parts of this movie, but some of the CGI stuff does not hold up. But where it does hold up for me is all that swinging. And this is something I really want to spend a lot of time talking about, is the swinging, the epic heroicness of it all, you know, for lack of a better phrase, and really Danny Elfman's score. Dude, Danny Elfman's score is probably half of the reason why I love this movie, and that is not discounting the rest of this movie. I think what it is, I think it just complements how good Danny Elfman's score really is. You know, I think now if you look at it, like, the score may seem really over the top for a lot of these sequences. But I think what it does specifically for when Spider-Man is doing heroic stuff or swinging around is what the music is actually telling with its chorus and all of that, the big epic orchestra of it all. I think what it's doing is saying through music almost like, yes, you haven't seen anything like this before on screen. Like, yes, it is heroic. It is beautiful. The way he moves around, it is incredible. Down to the last sequence when he swings his way over to the bridge to save Mary Jane and the kids. He's swinging his way through that bridge to save his girlfriend from death. And yet the music is like just the most beautiful, soaring celebration of heroicism. And it is celebrating that, like, the act of Spider-Man, the doing of Spider-Man is naturally beautiful, for lack of a better. I know you might think I sound ridiculous. Okay, listen, this is like my entire life. Leave me alone. But I just think that that's what that score does so well, is that it really does complete the movie and sells, like, this is all amazing. You know, you've never seen anything like this. Even to the point where there's that smaller sequence where he goes to the burning building and goes to save the baby. He saves the baby. It's incredible. He says, not coming back, Chief. And he goes up and to help save the other person. And just that shot of him swinging up into the building and swinging and arcing up and diving into the window, the music swells like Spider-Man's doing the most incredible fucking thing in the world. And it works, because he is. None of us can do that. And the movie really goes back and forth, like how Sam Raimi really kind of mastered with Evil Dead 2, with that tone of going over to horror, going over the craziness and zaniness. Here what it does is the seriousness and the campiness, the superhero stuff, and the real good actual movie with human emotion. How that teeter-totters constantly throughout the movie is just so freaking well done. And I think part of that is, like, you know, when you talk about all the serious moments with Peter and his troubles and learning his powers and the beauty of him swinging through the city, not to mention just those beautiful, like, there's a couple of beautiful wide shots, specifically the wide shot of him swinging with Mary Jane through the city, and the score amps up. It's just so beautiful, right? But then you cut to Jameson, which is obviously incredible, by J.K. Simmons. This is like, there's not really anything more I can say at this point to add to it, other than that it is just like perfectly written, minute to minute, like second to second hit. Everything is a zinger. Every single thing hits perfectly. And that's how all the dialogue and all the everything in this movie works. None of it is wasted. Specifically, where it does get the most talky and wordy is with the villain, the Green Goblin, and how strange and weird he is and how excellent it is. Again, another person, Willem Dafoe, There's not much more that I can say here that hasn't been said other than that he is perfect. He's great at everything he does. He plays, you know, from playing like a drunk, spooky lighthouse captain to Jesus Christ himself, to an assassin in John Wick, to the Life Aquatic. Like, the guy can do anything. But the way he is here is just really nicely done with little things here and there. Like, you may not have known this, but the fake teeth versus his real teeth in the reflection to kind of really show a goblin type image, to the fact that, like, he speaks in weird quotes and like prose, and like none of it makes sense. You don't even really know what he's referencing or what he's quoting, but everything sounds like he's referencing something, and it's really strange and good. And he just makes for a good villain. You know, he introduces audiences to the Spider-Man thing. The Spider-Man thing, that Peter Parker personal connection that ultimately fucks him over, and then he learns from it. This movie is a perfect example of that, with that really awesome last fight. It's small, it's in that abandoned building. It just works perfectly. It's a real guy pulling brick walls down with a rope. It's real dudes punching each other. Ooh. It's just real dudes punching each other, like, for real. It's like good shit. Spider-Man punches and kicks people. And that leads me to the action. Like, it is good. Again, a lot of it does rely on that early CGI, but there's there's moments of just greatness, you know, with Spider-Man zipping and running on the wall as fast as he can to save the kid during the parade. The kid, who I might add, if you notice at the last second, is literally embracing death. That kid was ready to die. I know, I always, like, you pause it and you look at that kid. Anyway, it also had a Stan Lee cameo, which was like, blink and you miss it, which is bad. It's so funny to see the old days of Stan Lee cameos where it wasn't like, hey, it's me, Stan Lee. You know, like, no offense, like, it's great, but, you know, it's just the humble beginnings of that stuff. What I was trying to say is that, like, you have the campiness, the over-the-topness of the Green Goblin. Like, you have, in a movie, you have the villain getting beat in the mid-fight and flying away saying, "We'll meet again, Spider-Man!" Like, they put that in a movie. They knew it was corny, but it worked perfectly because there was a Macy Gray singing a song 2 minutes before that. But, like, every single line in this movie is quotable. I can quote pretty much this entire movie front to back. It's really sad, to the point where, like, when I hear 2 weeks, if somebody says 2 weeks, I go, 2 weeks. Like little things, like quotes that aren't even good. I quote them all because I think the movie is just nice and tightly written and interesting, every single thing. But, you know, while it also does the good job of establishing the Spider-Man powers, it also does a good job of, like, embracing the cultural aspect of it, and that's where it leans on more of the funniness, the levity that I really like. Just the establishing sequence of Spider-Man, who, in this movie, more than any, seemingly wanted to, like, become Spider-Man partially out of being horny and wanting money to get a car and get the girl, which is great. But the whole thing, like, the whole sequence of, like, oh, you know, my brother saw him building a nest in the Lincoln Center fountain. You know, this guy is singing the Spider-Man song in the subway, to the famous gross comedian who I love, Jim Norton, saying,
"He stinks and I don't like him."
I love that scene. Those little things there, and then, of course, the end, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. It does do a good job of, like, establishing an actual Spider-Man in that world and really doing that whole connection with Spidey and New York. You know, it might seem at this point like it's a played out thing, but at the time it felt novel and authentic, and it hit at a time where, like, everybody felt weird. Like, you know, 9/11 had happened, you know, at least, you know, coming from someone who lives in New York, like, 9/11 had happened. Obviously, everyone in the United States felt very, like, attacked, but we'd all kind of rallied together, and there was that camaraderie. And this movie kind of hit that home, you know, from little things like Spider-Man landing in front of an American flag to, again, the whole city uniting behind him at the end. It was not a concept that was born out of that. Like, this wasn't like Spider-Man reflecting 9/11. It was just taking concepts from the comic that worked really well and bringing them at the forefront to movie-going audiences for when I think they needed it the most. So that's why I think a lot of it works, because you can have that stuff, that emotional stuff, the cultural stuff, the fact that the upside-down kiss was, like, the most iconic thing at the time, to that heroic music, the actual beauty and grace of Spider-Man dancing through the sky on webs, to the crazy corniness and the Green Goblin's over-the-top Power Rangers costume, seeing his eyes behind the lenses and seeing his mouth. It was awesome. To his craziness, to Jameson, to an excellent Aunt May who, like Uncle Ben, does a really great job of not being in the movie too much, but having just the right amount of impact. I think she really, really comes into her own in Spider-Man 2, which I'm going to find time to talk about soon. But let's talk about Tobey for a second. Let's talk about Tobey Maguire. I don't have time to like hit everything I could in this. I really think I should just make like a podcast where it's just me talking about something for an hour, but that would be madness. You don't want to hear that. I do want to talk about Tobey Maguire for a second. Good old Tugboat Maguire. So with him, is he the perfect Spider-Man? No. Is he my Spider-Man? No, I don't think so. But I think the whole conversation with this, and I think people, just fans of the movies, get kind of lost, is that there is no perfect Spider-Man, at least for me. I've said this so many times before, you guys may have heard me say this, but like as someone who enjoys comic books and stories, like the beauty of it is the different interpretations and taking the pillars or the foundation points of a character and tweaking them and messing around with them a little bit and trying to come up with other new and exciting ways and portrayals. And I think all of the movies do it in great ways. And I think this does as well. You know, so there's a lot of problems with Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, specifically in this first movie. The fact that he's not funny. His jokes are not good. Like, it's like a bummer. Like, I remember walking out of the theater being like, oh man, I wish he was funny. And also the fact that he's not really techie. He's clearly very smart, and they prove that even more in Spider-Man 2, but he's not like that tech whiz kid, and that comes with the whole web shooters thing, where you lose that. And I think that is still a fundamental part of Spider-Man's character that they are lacking. But then they give you all that other good stuff, you know? Like, they give you him literally choosing at the end of the movie not to take the girl and run. That is huge. That is a Spider-Man with Spider-Man problems. And that's why I like Spider-Man comic books, other Spider-Man stories, because Peter Parker, as much as he is haha goofy Peter Parker, he is always deeply troubled for different Spider-Man reasons, and this does it really well. And with this Peter, really, I think the most important thing is that you feel for him. He is warm. He is likable. You understand his love for Mary Jane here. You see him hearing her next door fighting with her parents and her coming out. Like, that feels so real. Like, you could be him, you know? He does come off, at least for me, real. And a Spider-Man that, like, you can still, at the end of the day, put yourself in his shoes. And I think that's important to these types of stories. So where Tobey Maguire, I think, lacks in, like, tech whizzy smartness and funniness, I think he really makes up for it with heart. And I think that is absolutely still a cornerstone of Spider-Man, and I'm glad it's there, and it worked for me. Also, it's gonna sound weird, but I am nostalgic for little things with him, like his woohoos and wahas and his like just his fight noises. Like, they are very iconic. It's very like unmistakably Tobey Spider-Man. I like stuff like that. I think that's why I like specifically Spider-Man 1 and 2, is because I think it really just set the standard in terms of like what I wanted and what I looked for out of my favorite heroes being depicted on the big screen. They have so much heart. They have so much Spider-Man drama, Spider-Man problems, but also all with like a sprinkle of hopefulness and celebrating heroicism and celebrating the beauty of being heroic and how cool it is. And like, that's the bottom line, man. So that's 2002 Spider-Man, Sam Raimi Spider-Man. I've really wanted to talk about this one for a long time. I've tried to keep my points concise and not ramble too far off on a tangent, but I hope you get what I'm going for here. I hope you can understand like why I love these movies. The heart, the awesomeness, all of it. Also, it had really good toys. But anyway, that's besides the point. Let me know what you think about this movie. I know newer generations or people who were raised on different Spider-Men have different feelings, so I think a spirited debate is warranted. I won't tolerate people just saying Tobey Maguire Spider-Man sucks, he's trash. I'm going to ignore your comment. But if you can have a conversation about why you prefer a different Spider-Man, I am down. Let's talk about this stuff. What's your favorite moment from the Raimi Spider-Man movies? What's your thoughts on Spider-Man overall? Are you going to stick around for my Spider-Man 2 video when I make that? Let's talk about this stuff down in the comments. I definitely want to hear from you. Big shout out to my folks on Patreon and YouTube memberships who have had my back. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed getting early access to this video. Thanks. But thank you everybody who chose to click on this and watch this. It is my fucking dream come true that I could talk about. When I was a kid melting in that seat, when I saw that Spider-Man preview, never would have I have imagined that I would be able to talk at a camera about that thing I love for a job. So I'm not going to get teary-eyed. I'm just going to say thank you very much. But I'm Jake Baldino. Thank you for being here. Subscribe because video games. Pizza's on me.